software pieces have been put together in such a fashion that users can go seamlessly from one platform to the other, whether it happens to be an iPad like this, an Android phone, or it happens to be a desktop using Mac or Windows. Now there's a third component to the Lightroom ecosystem. I've showed you desktop and I've showed you iPad. We also have a web component. So I'm going to launch a Chrome browser here, and this is Lightroom in the web environment. Now I don't know if my zoom is going to work, and Sarah, you can tell me if it does here. So if I zoom in on this corner, do you see the zoom or not?
No, we're not seeing the zoom.
Okay, excellent then. So we'll have to explain rather than show. Okay, if you go into a web browser and you type lightroom.adobe.com and you log in with your Adobe ID, this is the ID with which you've purchased a subscription to the software, it will bring up a window that looks like this. And this window is remarkably similar to what we had with the iPad and what we had with the desktop version of the software, but I'm running inside of a Chrome browser now. I've got organization, I've got a grid full of photos. I can click on a photo and I've got the ability to edit the photo, and you'll see the edit tools appear on the right-hand side, just like they did before. So I've got the same ability across 3 different platforms. So it doesn't matter whether I'm on Android or whether I actually have to move the video pod to close that window. Hold on a second. And now I've got the video pod in the wrong place. So hold on. And there we are. That worked better. Okay, so it doesn't matter if I'm on a Mac or a PC. It doesn't matter if I'm on iOS or Android. It doesn't matter if I'm using Chrome, Safari, Microsoft Edge, or whatever browser you might happen to be using. I've got access to my photos on every platform. I can edit those photos. I can output those photos. So that's the Lightroom ecosystem. Now I've glossed over a couple of things here, but I wanted to show the Lightroom Classic interface before we get too much further down the pike. So let me do that right now. I'm going to minimize Lightroom on the web. And I'll just point out too that there's also Lightroom for Apple TV, which if you have the Apple TV box and you want to see your photos from Lightroom on Apple TV, that is also available. I don't have a way to show you that. And right now the Apple TV above my monitor is running a virtual aquarium. So it would just be fish if I were to switch to it right now. So we'll leave that one off. So we've talked about the Lightroom ecosystem and the 3 components inside there. I'm going to go now, and my mouse just froze, so I'll go to my touchpad. There we go, we're reconnected. And this is the Lightroom Classic interface. And you'll see it's a much more industrial looking interface than the more modern Lightroom ecosystem interface is. It's got a lot going on. It's got a grid of photos, but you'll notice that the grids are more like slides rather than photos that just touch one another and don't have empty space in between them. And that allows me to have information inside there that will tell me things about the photo, whether it's synced or not. Does it have a pick flag? Has it been rotated? Has it been starred? If I put a star rating on it, the star rating will show up in there too. So I've got the ability to do different things here. I've got a much more robust set of tools on the left-hand side. I've got catalogs, folders, collections, and I think down at the bottom there will be published services as well. But the big difference is across the top. In the previous iteration of Lightroom that I was showing you, the Lightroom ecosystem, you basically had one module. You had organization with edit tools. Here, organization is a separate entity. Edit is a separate entity. The ability to use things in a map is a separate entity. The ability to create books is a separate entity. Slideshows, print, and web. And when I talk about web, this is actually website creation. This isn't just exporting a photo for a web. This is, I want to build a website. I want to put it somewhere on the internet and somebody can come to it and it will look good. So that's kind of the difference. This is a much more industrial rich environment that has many, many features that have been built up over the 14-year history of the program. Whereas Lightroom Ecosystem is a product that has been developed for the modern era, for people who want their photos on the go, who want them everywhere, but still want the rich set of editing tools that are available in the Lightroom Classic product. I suppose I should talk about this right now too. Lightroom Classic and Lightroom Ecosystem both use the Camera Raw engine to do their processing of the pictures. So when I'm editing a picture in Lightroom Classic or in the Lightroom ecosystem, even if it's on my Android phone, even if it's on my iPad mini, I am using Camera Raw under the hood. So when you go to the Camera Raw plugin in Photoshop, that engine that is used to edit those pictures and make them look like you want them is the same engine that you'll find here, and it's the same engine that you'll find here. The sliders are all the same, the settings are all the same, so that these photos can move seamlessly between Lightroom Classic, Lightroom Ecosystem, and Camera Raw in Photoshop, and retain all of their edits and their editability as you go across the platform. So that's important to understand, is that this is a new system built upon an old, established, robust way of editing your photos. And you know, this version has a new interface to it, and the older version has an interface that is 13 years old, but very, very apt for doing the heavy lifting that you might need to do on a set of photos. That's the quick introduction, and I wasn't too bad of a liar there. I said it would take me 15 minutes and it took 13, so I did good there. I'm happy with myself. So I want to talk, do we have any questions in the chat pod here, first of all?
Not yet.
Okay, great. That's super. We'll just keep moving here. So I want to talk a little bit about Lightroom Ecosystem and why you might want to use it over Lightroom Classic. Lightroom Ecosystem is based upon your Adobe ID. Your Adobe ID unlocks the keys no matter which application you're using. We have a lot of people who use the Lightroom Ecosystem who don't have a desktop computer. They're iPad only, or they just use their Android phone. And the Lightroom Ecosystem works very well with that. But the main thing to remember about Lightroom Ecosystem and what's different between it and Lightroom Classic is Lightroom Ecosystem uses a cloud-based catalog. So all of the information about all of your photos, what photos you have, how many star rays you've given them, whether they've got a pick flag, whether you've added a caption to them, if you've done edit settings to them, that all lives in the Adobe Cloud. And each device you use to access the Adobe Cloud then has access to pull that information down from the cloud, so that I can tell, looking at this photo in the top left corner, no matter which device I'm on, I know what the most recent work was done to that photo. And if I work on that photo, it will sync those changes on that photo back to the cloud. And I can kind of demonstrate that here real quick. I'm going to grab this photo right here, and I'm going to just do a quick edit on it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something really radical. I'm going to take the exposure up a lot so that you can see what's going on. Now, in order to commit this to the sync, you'll notice I have a little cloud icon in the upper corner here. If I want to commit this to sync, I'm going to move to the next image in the stack. Now I've got a sync icon going on here. If I come over to my iPad, if I can get my Mac to work properly here. Oh, I guess I'm covering up. I keep moving this video chat pod around because it keeps covering wherever it is I'm trying to work at the moment, so hold on. Okay, if I come down here and I grab the iPad and pull it over, you'll see that those edits just synced in right there. So the edit that I just did live on this photo here has already synced to my iPad via the cloud. And if I were to go out here and I were to come up to the Lightroom desktop interface, or not Lightroom desktop, the Lightroom Chrome interface, and I were to refresh this screen, give it a chance to redraw here. I'm sure we're pulling bandwidth like crazy. You'll see that that edit has already appeared here. So that's one of the beauties of Lightroom Ecosystem, is that when I edit a photo here, those changes go everywhere I want. When I delete a photo here, they're deleted everywhere I want. And it allows me a tremendous opportunity to sit at the Buick dealership and work on my photos while I'm waiting for my car's oil to be changed, or to sit down with a glass of wine at night and go through my iPad and select and reject photos. And all of that information gets synced. The story I like to tell is my trip to Tokyo. I went to Tokyo, and while I was in Tokyo, I shot photos with my DSLR camera, and then every night at the hotel, I would go back and I would load those into my laptop using a card and a card reader type of system. And then overnight at the hotel, while I had good internet, those would sync to the cloud. That was great. They were also syncing down to my iPad. Then I get on the airplane and I'm working on these photos on my iPhone while I'm on the airplane. Now I can't sync when I'm on the airplane because I don't have cellular and there are no Wi-Fi hotspots as you cross the Pacific. But when I landed in Minneapolis and I cleared customs, I turned on my phone and all the edits that I did on the airplane synced automatically to the cloud. Now I was also clever enough to have left my computer on at home. So all of those files that I had synced up from my hotel room in Tokyo have now come down to my desktop sitting in Apple Valley, Minnesota. And then when I landed, all of the additional edits I had done have synced down to my computer desktop in Apple Valley, Minnesota, so that when I walked in and opened the door to my house, all of my files from Tokyo and all the edits I had wanted to do on them were already sitting there and waiting for me. And that's very powerful. It's a great story to tell, provided, of course, you have internet that is robust enough to handle it on the other end. So that's one of the things that is big about the Lightroom ecosystem is that not only do you have multiple ways to access it, you have multiple ways to ingest photos. I can add photos on my iPad, I can add photos on the web browser, I can add photos on the desktop client, and then I can edit on all of those clients and they all stay in sync. So if that's what you need your photos everywhere so that you can access them from any device, this is probably a product you should look at. Now, one of the other things that's different about this than the classic world is the classic world has very robust searching and very robust keywording. But the Lightroom ecosystem relies on AI to do your organization for you. So for example, in Lightroom Classic, if I had wanted to go through these fireworks pictures, and I'll just scroll through here, and I wanted to find the ones that were red, you can see I've got some red explosions and I've got some green explosions. In Lightroom Classic world, the way we did things before, or in the bridge world even, you had to physically go in and select those photos and give them a hard keyword. Keyword red, keyword green, keyword explosion, keyword cityscape, whatever you wanted to do. But Lightroom ecosystem uses Adobe Sensei, which is a fancy way of saying we've got artificial intelligence and machine learning behind the scenes. And if I want to find a photo that's red, I just type the word red in there and it finds the photos that are red. Now I did that in the Lightroom web page, but I could come back here to the ecosystem client. I'm going to go to a grid view and I can type the same thing here. I'm going to have to move it down just a little bit because my Zoom window covers up my search screen. I can type in red here and say search for red, and it's going to find me the photos that are red. Now, some of these have been converted to black and white, but they were red before they went to black and white, so that's why they're coming up. But it gives me the ability to search for things that I haven't had the time to keyword. And that's very, very powerful. So if somebody comes in and say, hey, do you have any pictures of green frogs? I can search for green, I can search for frog. And even though I've not keyworded those things, they're available to me here.
Hey, Rick, I have a couple of questions. Do you mind if I...
Let's jump in with questions, yes.
Okay, from Sarah, she's saying, I'm assuming that the image files themselves are also stored in the cloud. Is storage included through Adobe or do you direct to your own cloud storage?
Those are both great questions. The answer to the first is yes. When I import a photo into Lightroom Desktop or Lightroom Web or Lightroom Mobile, that actual original photo does go to the cloud. So Adobe's base package for the Lightroom ecosystem includes 1 terabyte of storage. Now you are limited with these programs to using the Adobe storage. So if you have a big Dropbox contingent that you'd love to use, that won't work here. You do have to use the Adobe storage, and they have plans available up to currently 10 terabytes. And you had a second question?
Yes. When you're making changes to images in Lightroom, like cropping, more contrast, etc., are those changes being made to the actual original RAW file or a copy of the RAW file?
Neither. How it works is I have a RAW file. I make an editing change. That editing change is stored in the catalog so that when I open Lightroom a second time, it says, okay, you've got this original, You've got this group of edit settings you did in the past. I'm going to marry those together and render you a new preview on your screen. So that's how it works. If you need one that's baked in to where the changes are permanent, then you actually do an export of the modified file to a new file. The raw file is essentially never touched except to copy it to the cloud and to pull it back down. The edits sit alongside of it, and then the program marries those two things together. And that happens on the phone, that happens on the web, that happens on the desktop, that happens in Lightroom Classic, that happens in Camera Raw actually as well, if you save the settings to what they call a sidecar file. The edits live alongside, and each application is smart enough to say, I've got this file, these were the edits that were done to it, I'm going to show you the finished version. If you want to bake a finished version to give to somebody else, then you export that version out. But there is no copy of the raw file. You're always working on the original raw file, but you're never touching the raw file.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So there we are, where we talked about AI. All right. So with all the cool stuff you got going here, one of the things that's really neat is I just installed the software, a new version of it today. So it's giving me all kinds of coach marks. I'm going to dismiss those because we don't really need to see those. But we've got this thing called People. And one of the things that AI is really good is it's really good at identifying faces. And you know, there's a lot of that in the news now about people being happy about it or not happy about it. Of course, you have the ability to turn this off, and in countries and municipalities and states where facial recognition laws are different than they are for the bulk of the United States, it's off by default, but you can turn it on at your choice. And it'll go through my photos, and it does this on the Adobe server side so that your desktop or your phone doesn't have to be bogged down while this happens, is it will find faces in there, and it will group them together, and it will show you a bundle of 45 people and say, who is this? And you type in, well, this is my son, Adam. And when I type in my son, Adam, it finds more pictures. It'll say, hey, is this Adam? And I've got all these pictures of Adam. Now, before I'd have to go through and I'd have to find pictures of Adam, type in Adam's name on each one of them and search for them like this. But now each time I do an import of photos, it's going to go through and say, hey, I found 4 more pictures of Adam, drop them in the Adam bucket, and away we go. So it's got some very neat things that are done on the server side. You know, the automatic keywording, you know, red, tiger, frog, that's done on the server side. The automatic person recognition is done on the server side. So big computers somewhere in an air-conditioned room on a coast, you know, are doing that work for you so that when you pull your catalog in, you've got all that information available to you and you can search for things very easily. And that's pretty exciting. That's something that's not available in the Classic product. That's something that AI can give you, and AI is really the domain of the ecosystem at this point. And I would imagine there will be more AI features to come, but some of the AI that happens is in editing, for example. If I take a photo, we'll go back to the Aquatennial fireworks, and I'll just grab a photo at random. When I'm working like this, I don't know how it's going to happen, but one of the AI portions that we have in here is we've got the ability to apply automatic adjustments. So if I hit the auto button here, it's going to go through and it's going to attempt to apply auto settings. And you see I get a better looking version of the photograph. And that's not some unsophisticated automatic algorithm. It's very image dependent and has been trained on hundreds of thousands of images to give you the view that you want to see. Let's see if I scroll past these black and white ones real quick. I was doing a demo on how to convert lots of photos to black and white, so I have lots of photos that are black and white. So we'll grab this one right here. Another shot of the Minneapolis skyline during the Aquatennial. We'll apply the auto to it, and you can see that it brings up a lot of the cityscape and gives us a lot of nice definition of detail. So that's one of the AI functionalities that's in here too. So AI is starting to creep into the software in various places, and you'll start to see it in other places very, very shortly. There's a product in here called Enhanced Details, which actually lets you go in and do a deep dive on a raw file and extract additional detail from what we normally would. However, it results in creating a second file that is much larger than the first, so it has ups and downsides to it. So before I move on to Lightroom Classic, are there any questions in the chat pod there about the Lightroom ecosystem that we could answer real quick?
Nope, not right.
Okay. Then why don't we proceed here? I've got the chat window covering my toolbar at the bottom again here. So this is Lightroom Classic. Lightroom Classic is, like I say, it's been around for 13 years, so it's had a long time to develop its feature set. Its younger brother, Lightroom Ecosystem, is coming up fast. And then with regard to editing, both programs have about parity between their editing. We've been attacked by dogs. All right. So what I'm saying is that if you go to the edit a file in Camera Raw, which is the engine that Lightroom and Lightroom Classic run on, you've got a certain set of tools. You've got an exposure slider, you've got a spot removal tool, you've got all of these different tools you can use. But when you go to Lightroom Classic, you still have essentially that same tool set. And when you go to Lightroom Ecosystem, the same tool set is there as well. There's a couple of little things that are missing. Red eye removal is one I can think of off the top of my head, and range masking. But with the exception of those two items, pretty much every edit feature is available across Camera Raw, Lightroom Classic, and the Ecosystem. Oftentimes you'll see new features come in, and they'll come in at the same or they'll come in at the same time for all three programs. So that's very cool. Lightroom Classic is a little bit different. Here, your catalog is not cloud-based, it's disk-based. So your catalog, which is all the information about your photos, the location of where they are on the drive, any editing that you've done to them, is all stored on your local disk. So your catalog doesn't sync to the cloud. You can use Dropbox or something like that to sync your catalog to the cloud if you would like to, but within Adobe's cloud structure, Lightroom Classic lives on your hard drive. It is on your computer. You can back it up, you can move it from computer to computer, you can do a lot of things that basically Lightroom Ecosystem was designed to liberate you from. So Lightroom Classic is disk-based. Lightroom Classic is very robust in metadata. And I'm guessing that groups of journalists gathered here today are probably going to be real heavy on metadata, because I know that wire services and various other entities within the press world have very strict standards with regards to metadata, and Lightroom Classic maintains those standards and gives you the ability to access deep down into the metadata. And when you come to the session this afternoon, later on at 5:30 or 5:15, I guess it is, we're going to talk about the metadata a little bit more in depth and how you can manage the metadata. So that's one place where Lightroom Classic is different. It's very metadata rich. It relies on keywords and collections rather than an AI organizational and search function like the Lightroom Ecosystem does. It's kind of the bridge between managing your photos in Bridge, literally, and the file system on your OS, and that AI system that we have in the cloud. This is the step in between. So here I'm going to want to keyword images very heavily. I'm going to want to bring this image in and say, this is a city, it's night, it's got lights, it's fireworks, it's got reflections from the window I was shooting through. I can see here on the image too. So you can see that there's a reflection right there on the image. You know, so I could keyword all of these things in so that I can find this later. And that's much more advantageous to me. If I want to find pictures of Costa Rican tree frogs, I would rather type the word frog and search through a keyword list that I maintain than I would to go digging around on my hard drive trying to remember, well, what I was in Costa Rica 22 times in the last 10 years, and I was there probably in February when I saw the frogs. I'm going to have to check a whole bunch of folders looking for these photos. Whereas if I keyword it, I can have that photo identifiable very quickly. In the Lightroom Ecosystem, a server somewhere does the keywording offline, and I don't have to worry about having to do that work. So you've got 3 degrees of control. Find your file yourself, keyword it so you can find it later, or use AI to do it, depending on which product you're working with. Lightroom Classic is very much a collections-based workflow. Bridge is a folder and file workflow. Classic is a collections and keywords. You can build collections, and I liken it like this. You know, if I've got shoe boxes sitting in front of me and I've got Polaroids in my hand, and I want to store this picture of my son and daughter in a shoebox that says kids, I can flip that photo into the shoebox that says kids. Now, if I want to store that in a shoebox that's called Adam, I've only got one photo, and I've got to take that out and I've got to put it in the other shoebox. That's a file and folder system. With a collection system, A single original can live in hundreds of collections, literally. So it could live in my daughter's folder or a collection, my son's collection, my children's collection, my family collection, my kids who are in trouble for not doing their homework collection. Whatever the collection I want to create, I can create this collection. And Lightroom is very much about creating collections. And because a photo can live in more than one collection, it's a very nice way of doing business, because then I don't have to have multiple copies on the disk in multiple folders. And if I edit one, all the collections reflect the edit. Whereas if I'm working in a bridge type environment and I have multiple versions, I pull one in and edit it, then I have to remember to go and replace all of the others, or I have to go back and edit them similarly. So that's another big difference.
We do have a few questions, and maybe this would be the appropriate time. So which of the two would you recommend for editing a lot of photos most efficiently?
That's a very good question. And not only am I going to tell you right now, but we're going to show it more in depth this afternoon. But let's say I had a shoot of 500 photos, and we'll use a wedding example. We'll pick on the wedding photographer today. If I had a wedding photographer who had their camera set wrong and say it was underexposing every image 1 1/3 stop, and then they get back to their studio and they go, oh my God, I did this thing. This is the program to do that with. And it's very robust. If I wanted to grab photos and I wanted to select, I'm just going to select 13 here. I'm holding down Shift and clicking on the 13th. There's a panel over here called the Quick Develop panel. And we're in the library module here. And if I wanted to bump the exposure 1 1/3 stops, that's 2 button clicks, and all of those photos are going to get edited at once. Lightroom Classic is very good at editing lots of photos at one time. That's not to say that Lightroom Ecosystem cannot do it, but it was not built for that purpose. So the way you would do it there is you would build a preset to do your photo, and then you would apply that to a couple of hundred photos. Here I can actually edit photos live. I can either do it through this Quick Develop panel right here, or I can do it in the Develop module through what's called a Sync panel. So there's a Sync panel down here. This lets me manually sync images. I can choose what I want to sync between the images, or I can actually turn on a function called Auto Sync. And as I'm editing this image, those other 12 that I have selected are also edited live in the system while I'm doing that. It's also a thing that if you don't turn it off, you can get yourself into trouble. But if I wanted to edit 1,000 photos very quickly, when I say edit, that could be I want to do develop settings to them like we just did. Or if I want to go through 1,000 photos and very quickly pick out the 25 I like best and the 200 I want to throw away, Lightroom Classic is definitely the beast I would rely on for that. Did you have another question?
I think that you might have just answered this, but let me just make sure.
Okay.
So Anne is asking, is there a way to import or add various filters like action sets for sharpening, beautification, and other into Lightroom Classic?
Actually, Lightroom Classic, Camera Raw, and Lightroom Ecosystem all use the same preset engine. So if you'll look here, I'm going to go into the Develop module, and you'll see that on the left-hand side, there's a group called Presets. And you'll see that there's a company called Visco who makes oodles and oodles of preset. I want to emulate Kodachrome film. I want to do sepia tones. I want to do sharpening of edges. I want to do a vignette to all my photos. That would be available through the preset panel. And presets work no matter which environment you're in, Camera Raw, Classic, or the Ecosystem. Within the ecosystem, however, there's a difference. In Lightroom Classic, your presets are file-based. They live on your computer. In the ecosystem, they actually sync. So if I install a preset in Lightroom Ecosystem Desktop, that will sync to my phone, and then that preset will be usable on my phone as well. So there are third-party presets, oodles of them out there. Visco is one that I mentioned right here because it's pretty much a standard one for doing either film simulations or doing beautification type edits. I love that word beautification. I'm gonna have to steal that. But you can see that there are presets here for sharpening, light, medium, and heavy. There are presets to apply faux grain. There are presets to do vignetting, presets to do mini black and white conversions. So those are all available. And like I say, there are people who give these away. There are people who sell them. You can buy them through the Adobe Exchange store on adobe.com. And this is something I didn't show you, and maybe I should real quick. In the Lightroom ecosystem, we'll jump out of Classic for just a minute because this is directly related to presets. I'm going to bring up the, boy, I have to move this little video chat pod all the time. I didn't realize I used so much of the screen. So I'm going to bring my iPad back on the screen. Here's my iPad. Lightroom ecosystem has available to it what's called a, they move the icon on me here. So it's what's called the home page. And what it's about is the stuff that I've done on the top line, interactive tutorials on the middle line, and on the bottom section, there's a place called Discovery Posts. And I'm just going to show you for an example. It says Discovery Inspiring Edits. I'm going to hit the See All button, and I'm going to go to Fashion. And if you look at this blue picture right here, this girl in blue that looks like faded denim, that's actually one of my photos and one of my images. And if you tap on that, this will show you the before. So that was the out of camera shot, and now it's loading it, and it's going to show you the steps I took to edit the image. And what the cool thing is about this is there's the before and the after, so it shows you that process, is you've got the ability up here at the top to save that edit as a preset, and that preset will then sync to your other Lightroom ecosystem clients. It won't sync back to Lightroom Classic, but you do have the ability to export it and put it back in Lightroom Classic if you do. So yes, there's a very robust preset community out there, and it's accessible with the entire suite of products. And they're pretty much, you create a preset in Lightroom Classic, it works in Camera Raw, it works in Ecosystem, and vice versa. You create it in the others, and it works back there as well. Did we get that one?
That's good. Dan has a question, and that is, are you able to import a keyword list if your organization uses a common list?
In Lightroom Classic, you can. In fact, in my former life, one of the things that I did was I used to make custom keyword lists and sell them. Birds of Costa Rica, mammals of North America. And they would have a series of features. They'd be taxonomically listed by the animal's family, and they would have the Latin name and genus and species in the synonyms. And like the cougar is called a puma some places, a catamount some places, a panther some places. It would have those synonyms in it. But what you can do is if you're in the library mode, so I'm going to hit G to go to library. If I go to metadata, there's a place here called import keywords. And if your organization has a list, and if that list is formatted correctly, and those specs are pretty publicly available for how to format a list correctly, it will import that keyword list in the proper hierarchy with the proper synonyms, with the proper export and import constraints, and you would be able to use that keyword list from within Lightroom. And like I say, I've got some of these out there. I don't know if I've got them loaded on this machine. I have to move for the chat pod, but if you go down to the keyword list, keywords will show here. And let's say I'm just going to see if there was birds of Costa Rica, or it's animals right here. So animals, birds, crows, ravens, black-billed crow. So this is a list that was built out by me. And within that keyword list, there is a genus and species name there. So yeah, very much so. That's very easy to do. In Lightroom Classic, in Lightroom Ecosystem, that's not possible. You can add an individual keyword here or there to an image, but most of the keywording is done by the Sensei engine on the Adobe servers and then just shared with your catalog.
If you don't mind, there are two other questions. Let's go ahead and take them. Alex says that I've found many Adobe programs are not friendly to those with low vision. Was wondering how to make the text bigger without cutting it off on the sides.
This is Lightroom Classic we're talking about?
I'm not sure. I'm not certain.
We will assume that it is for now. So I'm running on a MacBook Pro 2017 Retina, so it's about 3,000 pixels. It's 3K resolution. In Lightroom Classic, if you go to the preferences, that's under Lightroom Classic preferences on the Mac. It's under Edit Preferences on the PC. And you go to Interface, and forgive my small text here, there is a place where you can change the font size from small and large on the Mac. On Windows, there's many more options. You can actually choose 150%, 200%. And basically, Depending upon the resolution you're running, depending upon the physical screen dimensions, how many inches across it is, you can choose a font size that will give you a readable interface without compromising the length of names of text. Now, where that falls apart is if you've got an incredibly long set of nested collections or folders that you have to read across here, it will truncate some of that. You'll see that there are ellipses in a couple of places here along the way. That's what you'll see, but that's where I would go to do it. You can, generally speaking, the interface is going to be black with white text or a shade of gray with white text. You can control the size to some extent. You can do that through the OS, through their monitor controls, and you can do that through the preferences in Lightroom Classic. And between the two, you should be able to get a workable.
There was one question from earlier that I thought was kind of interesting, and that was, how do I prevent my phone from uploading all of the memes that I download into the Lightroom ecosystem, or just random pics?
Ah, okay. Well, we're going to switch over to the ecosystem again, and we're going to bring up the iPad. I don't have a phone attached right now, but I always look for the iPad icon in my dock, but it's actually the QuickTime icon. So when I'm in Lightroom, I've got three little dots in the upper corner of the screen on the upper right-hand side. If I tap those, it'll give me a settings panel. And when I go to settings, I've got an import option. Tap import, and it will let me choose some things that I might want to do. I can choose to auto add from camera roll. And if I do, that will get photos, screenshots, and videos. I've turned off screenshots and videos in this case. So a screenshot would be like I take a screen capture using the buttons on the phone and I get a PNG file. Videos are any videos that I record. So I'm telling Lightroom, I only want you to take photos off of the camera on this particular device, and I only want those to upload to the cloud automatically. Now, I don't have to load anything automatically. I can choose to manually upload everything. So if I turn off that photos button there, now nothing is going to upload to the cloud. If I want something to upload to the cloud, I'll touch the bottom right-hand corner. You'll see I've got a blue button with a camera and an add photos button. We'll tap the add photos, and it will give me the choice to add from camera roll, from all photos, or from files. Or actually, if I have a camera plugged in to the lightning port on this iPad, I can actually pull right off of the camera memory card. But I can tap from camera roll, and I can just choose the photos I would like to add. So you can add manually so that nothing gets up there unless you say so, or you can control it by type, photo, screen capture, or video. And between those two, you can usually get to where you need to be.
So you have about 10 minutes left and a few other questions. What would you like to do, Rick?
Well, I think we've demonstrated fairly well the differences between the Lightroom ecosystem and Lightroom Classic. You know, Lightroom Classic is, I want to do it on my disk, and I have lots of options with how to do everything. Lightroom Ecosystem is I want everything everywhere. I want to access it from everywhere. And I don't necessarily need to print a photo. I don't necessarily need to watermark a photo. I don't necessarily need to do detailed IPTC metadata. You know, as long as everybody's kind of got a grasp on that, that was my goal for this session. But if we've got questions, I'd rather answer what people want to know than what I want to say.
Okay, Alex has a question. Can you explain how to organize photos in Lightroom Classic?
So when Lightroom Classic brings in photos, we'll get rid of the iPad here. We'll bring in Lightroom Classic. So this is an example. I'm going to say I'm sitting here. I'm in all photographs in the catalog panel. I've got 20,000 photos sitting here, and I'm going to bring in some photos. So I'm going to hit import, and it's going to ask me to select a source. This source might be a camera memory card. It might be a folder of existing photos. Could be anything, but I'm going to actually pull it from the desktop. And I'm going to say, give me this import items. This is a specially prepared folder. So when I bring photos in, that's when I start my organization. And I'm going to move this chat pod back to the bottom again. All right, so I've got these photos. There's 6 of them, and they're all selected. I might say that this is from the Northern Exposure Seminar. And I hate typing on screen because I am the world's worst typist when I'm on screen. So I've got these photos, they're gonna come in, and I'm gonna say copy them. I want you to move them from where they are to a new location. And it's gonna let me do the first step of organization. It's gonna let me choose where to put them. In a pictures folder, for example. That's where they're going to go. And they're gonna organize by date. So it's gonna create a folder that says 2020/2020-0404, and it's gonna put those photos in there. That's physically where they're going to live. Now I've also given them organization by giving them a keyword. And I could give them another keyword called import example. So I can find these later on. So I give them keywords that apply to the whole breadth of photos. If I'm in Japan and I've got 25 pictures of a temple and 17 pictures of sushi, I'm probably not going to want to use the same keyword for both of them other than the word Japan. If I've got metadata presets I want to apply, say my copyright, whatever I'm going to put on their photo, I can do that as well, but I can also add them to a collection while I'm at it. And that collection can be an existing collection. You can see I have lots of collections there. Or I can create a new collection and say U of M Northern Exposure. So now there's going to be a collection for those that are created the moment I hit this button. So when I hit that button, they're going to be in a collection. It's going to show me that collection. They're going to be keyworded, and they're going to be put in folders like this. Move the chat pod again. I'm going to hit the import button, and all of those things I just told it to do are going to happen now. So they're going to come in a collection, and they're coming in right now. And they're already in a collection. They're already keyworded. They're already in a folder. So I've done most of my organization up front. If I find I've got a photo I don't want to be in the collection, I can right click on it and say, remove the photo from the collection. I can drag it to an additional collection if I choose. And I can drag this one to this collection right here. I can grab bundles of them by using shift and command clicks or shift and control clicks and say, move these two photos to this collection right here. And there's the two photos I just moved. So it's very much a drag and drop prospect. I can move things in folders inside of Lightroom. I can move things in collections inside of Lightroom. And that gives me the ability to pretty much sort and drop things where I want them. But you'll notice that even though they were in the collection that I imported them from, when I dragged and dropped them into a new collection, they still stayed in the old collection. So I wasn't moving them, I was copying them. So I have to remember to go back and clean out a collection if I use a drag and drop operation. But that's pretty much how I do it. I bring stuff in. I let things fall into dated folders because I know if I'm looking for Christmas pictures 2018, I can go back to the December 25th folder. If I'm looking for pictures of a frog in Costa Rica, where I've been there 20 times over the past 15 years, I'm going to have to rely on a keyword. If I said, I want to do everything from the headshot session I did at Adobe Summit in 2015, that's going to be a collection where I've created and dropped those photos in. So I'll use collections, I'll use collection sets to create the infrastructure for how I'm going to manage those. And I'll pretty much leave folders as how the photos are stored on disk. And I don't use folders much as an organizational construct. I use it as a way to back up my photos. So I said, okay, well, I backed up everything to July 2nd. I need to grab the bundle of folders from July 2nd on and back those up. But when I'm in Lightroom and I'm looking for something, I'm looking for it in a collection. And that's how I approach organization. Get it into a collection that's meaningful from a top level, give it keywords that are meaningful on a photo level, and from there I can build whatever search structures I need, either through the search filter bar up at the top or through what's called a smart collection interface down here in the collections panel. It lets me build collections that I can say, show me every photo taken in Costa Rica that has a frog where it was raining, and it will pick all that stuff out and drop me a smart collection out there that says, here's all those photos. And the beautiful part of a smart collection is the next time I come in and I bring in some photos that are pictures of frogs in the rain in Costa Rica, and I've keyworded those things properly, they'll automatically populate those collections. So those are the constructs I rely on in a very, very overview of the work.
Okay, Adrian is asking, once a photo is imported into Lightroom off of my hard drive, and then the original is removed for laptop to an external, for an example, can I still access the picture through Lightroom?
So if I've got Lightroom, this photo lives someplace. We're going to right click on it. We're going to say show in Finder. So here it is. It's in Finder right here. If I add, move, rename, or delete this picture from the OS dialog, Lightroom will lose it because Lightroom doesn't know what I'm doing over here in Finder. But if I add, move, rename, or delete from inside of Lightroom, it will. So if I've got I don't have another drive attached right now, but if I had another drive and I wanted to move this off my main drive, I would grab it here and I would drag it over and drop it in the drive where I wanted it to be. Lightroom would move the location using a file system move. It actually uses a file system copy, then a file system delete, which is what your OS does. And then it will update all of the information inside Lightroom and says, hey, this picture that used to be on this drive is now on this drive, and it will keep track of everything for you. So as long as you do the work inside of Lightroom, it'll always remember where it is. If you do the work outside of Lightroom, then you've got to repoint Lightroom to the correct location. And hopefully you didn't move lots of photos to lots of different places because that can be quite tedious. But it's best doing it inside of Lightroom. It keeps very good track of that stuff, and it remembers when your drive is not connected. Of course, you might have to reconnect that drive to do some additional work on that photo, but as long as the drive is connected, it will know you moved it. It will let you get to it.
There was kind of good conversation among two of the participants, but I think it would be good to ask you about this.
Okay.
So Ann Arbor Miller, I kept referring to Ann Arbor Miller as Ann, sorry about that, was asking that they were trying to wrap their head around workflow. So the question was, for photographers who are using either Lightroom product, do people stop using Photoshop for working with images?
No, I consider Photoshop to be the best Lightroom plugin ever invented. Most of my heavy lifting is camera, Lightroom, Photoshop if necessary, and then when I'm done with that Photoshop file, it comes back to Lightroom. So I will do the initial processing in Lightroom. There are things that Lightroom cannot do well, say take out a telephone wire, remove braces, glare on glasses, although that's getting better. There are things that Photoshop is designed for, and most of the work is done in Lightroom, and then it's normally off to Photoshop to do a retouch of a blemish. Power lines are something I remove quite regularly. I go to Photoshop for that. But then whenever I'm done with that file, if I send it from Lightroom to Photoshop, that does create a second file. That second file that's been edited in Photoshop then comes back to my Lightroom catalog and lives alongside the original raw image so that they're kind of in a stack together. And I know I had this file to start. I did this work in Lightroom, sent it to Photoshop, it came back. And then that one that comes back from Photoshop can be additionally tweaked in Lightroom as well. So that's the workflow I use. I let Lightroom do most of the heavy lifting and managing, send it to Photoshop or Nick or On1 or whoever has got the plugin that I want to use, and then let that result come back into Lightroom and manage the result alongside the raw file.
Well, I'm sure, oh, one follow-up question from Ann Arbor Miller. Lightroom sounds like it's replacing the purpose of Bridge, the organizing, viewing, sorting images, with the advantage of being able to do some editing with keywords and metadata. Would you agree with that?
Bridge is great for the designer. Lightroom is great for the photographer. If I'm a designer, I have a whole lot of assets. I have EPS files, I have PDF files, I have fonts, I have a host of bitmap image formats and vector image formats that cameras don't record. And for those types of things, if I'm working in Illustrator, I'm working in design, I'm working in programs that are not photo-based, Bridge is still an absolute necessity. If I'm working in photos and I'm not working a one-off approach where I find the photo in Bridge, I open it in Camera Raw, edit it in Photoshop, save the result. If I'm outside of that workflow, Lightroom does far more than what Bridge will do. And basically Bridge uses the Camera Raw as a plugin. And so the edit stack is the same, but the ability to manage photos in a lot of different ways. I mean, Bridge can do some powerful things for management, but it doesn't have all of the management tools that Lightroom does, and they're not photo specific. They're more design specific. So if I'm a designer who's got lots of different assets, you know, I've got an Illustrator template, I've got a color swatch from this company, I've got a vector graphic, a bitmap graphic, and a font. Bridge is the place to go to manage all of those assets to get them into a finished document. Lightroom would not do that because it doesn't handle those file formats. But from a photo strictly perspective, I can do a lot more with photos in Lightroom than with Bridge. So if you're strictly a photographer, yes, Bridge is replaced by Lightroom. If you are not a photographer, you do other things, then you still need Bridge.
Well, I'm sure that everybody on the call would agree that this was like the most incredible primer for Lightroom. Thank you, Rick, for doing this.
Oh, you're welcome. I was glad to be here.
Let's say applause all the way around. Just to let you know, this is being recorded and it will be made available on the Northern Exposure site. I'm not sure how quickly, probably within a day or so. So you can always come back to this. There's another session this afternoon where Rick and Jeff will go through more advanced settings. Do you want to say anything about that?
The setting this afternoon is going to be more Lightroom Classic focused than Lightroom Ecosystem. So I would say from an editing standpoint, I'm going to be demonstrating most of the tools in Classic. I may bounce out to Lightroom Desktop to show you an edit real quick. The same edit on desktop and the same edit on the iPad. But I would say probably 75 to 80% of the class will be spent in Lightroom Classic. And I've got a variety of images in this catalog. I'm not sure what we're going to be editing here. We may take a poll before we start the class and say, what kind of an image would you like to see edited, or what type of edits do you need to see, so that you can see what's going on there. And then we're also going to cover editing metadata, how to build a metadata preset to get the corporate metadata you need to be attached to your image, and I may even grab a keyword example for how to import a keyword list and show that actual process happen. So that's what I would say about this afternoon's class. It's going to be much more in flux, and we're going to float with it. Today was more of a canned presentation for this one. We can float a little bit this afternoon.
Okay, Regina is back. Regina, do you want to say anything?
I just wanted to say thanks to Rick and thanks for everyone to coming. And we should have the recording up, within a few hours. It'll be up by tonight.
The next session is at 1:45, and that's going to be about research and what we know about how people comprehend, remember, want to share photographs in the age of Instagram, kind of like what makes photojournalism so incredibly valuable. So that's what we've got, and we'll talk to you later.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Rick.